Why is Robert Bates with us in the studio? Well, you've guessed it. We're talking about there's lots to talk about here, but particularly that Albanian criminal allowed to stay in Britain in part because his son doesn't like foreign chicken nuggets. Apparently makes him go all funny. Doesn't like... I don't know what they do over there in Albania. And here's the thing, Robert, I would guess... I think Albania have McDonald's.
Yeah, you'd think McDonald's, same recipe, just copy and paste it across the globe, wouldn't
It's the same thing, right?
Yeah, maybe the vibe's not quite the right, although something with the tomato ketchup, I'd imagine.
But then, you know, the Bird's Eye people, I'm sure they make nuggets. They probably, I would imagine, export to...
But it's clearly a big enough difference for this individual to be able to stay in the country. It's clearly a big enough difference for real concerns to be raised. So who are we to doubt this chap's taste buds?
Yeah, well, they said... I mean, apparently the serious side of it is food sensitivities. I mean, it's Albania we're talking about.
No, well, this is exactly the problem. It's pretty much we have, at the moment, an immigration tribunal system that will feast upon anything that is presented to them that would allow them to concoct some form of argument that these individuals will in any way suffer by being returned to their home country. We recently released a report of an individual that we couldn't detain and deport despite him being a career criminal, 15 convictions, because his daughter had gender identity issues. So these are the kind of cases that you hear a lot about whilst you actually study the cases going through the immigration tribunal. And the problem is because these tribunals are staffed and led by left-wing lawyers that have kind of graduated to the position of immigration judge. You know for a fact that the person presiding over these cases is coming at each and every single one with a certain worldview. They're very much in these circles of, you know, these left-wing law courts, these left-wing law firms, all these kind of, you know, networks that do exist. So there isn't really any surprise, frankly, that these kind of cases are coming to the fore.
And I think this has become so entrenched that the kind of people that would support this, and you know that there are adults out there that lurk among us who would probably come on a show like this and explain why it was right to make this decision. It's not as if... I used to think these are just idiots, you know, half-wits and morons who've kind of decided to subscribe to this kind of weird bullet point list of insanity and have almost sat there in bed rehearsing it. I think it's gone beyond that. I think it's so entrenched they actually believe this stuff.
I think
they genuinely have a world view of it.
They've concocted a whole world view for themselves that almost exists in parallel to reality. These are individuals that clearly spend every waking moment reading over human rights law and, you know, discussing with one another human rights law and the ins and outs of it. And that is really part of the problem, in that we have a whole professional class of people, left-wing lawyers, immigration lawyers, involved in this line of work that are just obsessed with it, and obviously it helps them to be able to expand the remit of that human rights, certain things, you know, being dragged into what needs to be considered, and it really emboldens and aggrandises their own stature. And I think we have to have a real conversation about whether the current system of immigration tribunals are working, whether it really does make sense to have former left-wing lawyers presiding over these cases, or whether we'd be much better placed to have something akin to a jury on these kind of instances, whereas the British public are, you know, 3 or 9 individuals that are able to actually pass more common sense judgment.
I'm glad you made that point, because I like a left-wing lawyer, and I'll tell you why I like a left-wing lawyer. Firstly, it reminds me I'm in a democracy.
And it's good copy as well, isn't it, when we come up with this kind of...
Absolutely. So they provide a lot of material. A left-wing lawyer is fine. A left-wing judge is not fine, and that's the problem, isn't it? Because I want somebody to go, yeah, I'm going to argue the case for this person. I'm going to use everything I can in the book. If anyone's ever sat in a courtroom, you know, you hear a defence lawyer stand up and sometimes you think, wow, you know, well, but maybe this guy isn't guilty after all. They're very good, you know. And we should be able to test the law to its nth degree. I get that. But I also want a judge that's going to sit there and say, I've heard I was with you all the way, left-wing lawyer, until you introduced the nugget clause. And then, frankly, you lost the room. Case dismissed. Get out. And by the way, the 747's parked in the car park.
Well, frankly, the human rights law and legal framework almost exists parallel and on top of actual law, what we'd consider normal law. It's a kind of construct that's been, you know, embellished in the last 20 or so years. So you'd find that those lawyers, those left-wing lawyers that you refer to, are in many ways making it up as they go along, and they're presenting their case to a left-wing judge who is very akin to go along with those arguments, probably because they're in the same social circles and they go for dinner once a week with one another as well. So we have to realise that the human rights kind of experiment has gone way out of hand, and it's something I truly believe will be obsolete in 20 years' time. I just think it's now running up so far against common sense, it's running up against reality to such a massive degree that we can't carry on like this. And, you know, discussion is thankfully going on about our relationship with the ECHR. We need to do more to talk about whether we need to keep the Human Rights Act. We don't.
Is this ECHR led then, like a case such as this? I mean, I would imagine what probably happened in reality. They said, my child has, some form of neurodiversity, and that neurodiversity manifests in food. For example, even a chicken nugget they can't eat unless it's a certain type. You don't even get that in Albania. It would have been something like that, I guess, which is still, frankly, not a reason for a bad person to remain in the country. I'm sorry, that's not our problem, and it's not the problem of the judiciary or the government, and God knows how much money is spent on these kind of cases. But nonetheless, when they argue these cases, are they utilising the ECHR here?
Well, unfortunately, because this is a lower tribunal, we can't actually read the ins and outs of the details, but it wouldn't take a genius to work out that I would imagine Article 8 of the ECHR, the right to family life, has been evoked to some degree in this particular case. And of course, these articles of the ECHR are so broad. The right to family life, what does that actually compose of? It's so
owning
nebulous in idea. Well, exactly. I was about to point out, during the Brexit debates, there was one that was raised many, many times because it's something that can be just endlessly extended to encompass anything.
Anything
if you
like.
You have a car parked in your driveway that you've had for 3 years. That's probably a part of your family at that point as well. And this is the kind of thing that I think immigration lawyers in particular like to play with. They like to push those limits, and they like to be imaginative and to try and experiment with what works and what doesn't work. And unfortunately, it has real-world consequences in that this individual will now be staying in the country. Of course, there's another case that's come out in the last hour of a paedophile that's being kept in the country. We're unable to remove this paedophile because, again, he has a right to family life. He has children in the country, and they'd be adversely affected by his removal. So
that's a sex offender.
Well, exactly. But the thing is, he's got so many rights. He's got probably very well-funded, probably at our expense with legal aid to some degree as well, lawyers who are prepared to take those experiments, make those kind of thought programmes take place, and to figure out that actually we could probably argue he has a right to family life in this case.
Bonkers,
and it trumps, honestly, it trumps British safety, it trumps, the well-being of the nation. It trumps, basically, actually, do we respect our own laws and common sense and decency?
And talking of Trumps, I mean, people, often these left-wing lots, scratch their head and go, how did Donald Trump get elected? Because of stuff like this. Because of this kind of nonsense where Trump stood up and, OK, not specifically about the chicken nuggets, but he was on that, the insanity, the upside-down nature of the world we're in, common sense approach where no one with a scintilla of intelligence would look at those stories. I mean, the paedophile is a far more compelling example, and say he has a right to a family. He's a paedophile and he's got a right to a family. Sorry, this is nonsense. Get him out.
So human rights law at the moment is only actually still holding on because it's entrenched, because it's the legal system. It's not there because it has the backing of the population. The British public don't look at these laws and these processes and think, thank goodness that's there. It is only there at the moment because Tony Blair and then the Conservatives did nothing to actually remove it. So I think it's encouraging. The more you hear about how ridiculous these cases are and how far removed from actually serving the interests of the public these cases are and these judges are, we will inevitably have a backlash. And that's why, as I said, I don't think that the human rights kind of edifice has more than 20 years left, because we will eventually end up with some champion figure that is able to say quite clearly, this isn't working for us, this has to go. Who does this actually benefit?
Here's a weird headline, though, in terms of what's happening in the world of illegal immigration, Robert. Is it possible that Labour are doing better at getting the wrong people, illegal people, out of the country, doing better than the Conservatives were? Because they are bragging at the moment, and I think I'm right in saying there's more data to come later as well on their position. Nearly 4,000 illegal workers were arrested in raids, car washes, nail bars, restaurants since Labour came to power. January saw a record 609 arrests, 828 raids. That's a 38% rise in enforcement compared to the previous year. Is Home Secretary Yvette Cooper doing what the others couldn't?
Well, she's doing slightly better than the Conservatives, but I really don't know.
The bar was very low.
Well, exactly. I don't know if that's any praise at all.
True.
The fact of the matter is, the numbers you were reading out there, 609, a couple of thousand here, a couple of thousand there. We have around about 1.2 million illegal immigrants in this country. Not all have come across on small boats, of course. Some have overstayed visas, but when pushed on this issue, Labour politicians seem unwilling or unable to provide an answer about what their plan actually is to deal with that huge problem. It's all very well and good talking about these few thousand that they have managed to deport, most of them were voluntary deportations where the individuals have agreed to be removed to their home country. It's when you get to those people that are insistent that they have a right to stay in the country or have built, as we said before, a family life here and will therefore fight tooth and nail to stay in the country, that they actually will run up against problems. And of course we also have the issue that many countries won't allow us to return their own nationals to their country. So we have many countries, especially in South Asia, who will simply say, sorry guys, that chap entered your country illegally, we're not taking him back, it's your problem to deal with now. And Labour haven't got an answer to any of those questions.
Even if you had, let's say Reform UK were running the show, they are the most outspoken and have intentions to be incredibly robust on this stuff, including stopping the boats, for example. But even if you stop the boats, you've still got a queue of 100,000 people that are stuffed in hotels that came via those boats over the course of the last few years. To be authentic about meaning business, you've got to address that as well as the newcomers, haven't you?
Well, exactly. And that backlog, of course, is a huge pull factor in the first place. People are looking at the fact that we're not able to remove people on
worth 5 years' wait, right?
Precisely, it's worth a punt. It's worth a punt, even if you are in a hotel for a little period of time. So that really is the key to this problem. It's the backlog and it's the huge numbers that are here illegally. If we want to stop people to continue coming over on the boats, we have to make it very clear to them that even if they do step foot on British soil, they will not be allowed to stay. And the clearest way to do that is to have huge deportation efforts, whether that is, raiding these places that we know are probably indulging in improper workplace practices and hiring people that they haven't actually managed to verify are eligible to work, or whether that is going into those areas where we know that they're more likely to be individuals living here illegally, HMOs and things like that. And, then looking what we can do with the public services, the interface that these illegal migrants will have had with the state, whether that be through dentists, whether that be through doctors or A&Es, and seeing whether these individuals are actually registered to live here as well. There are so many things that can be done, but it takes a huge amount of effort, and it's something that neither of the main parties over the last 6 years have shown that they're prepared to do.
Indeed. We should say, by the way, on the chicken nugget gate problem, that is still under review. So I think the Home Office have opposed this decision, or they certainly want a review of it. So the tribunal will reassess whether or not the nugget is a reasonable impact. I like this, though, from Anne in Aberdeenshire, who says, reference nuggets. When did the boy go abroad to taste the foreign nuggets? Did he come back illegally?
Well, I mean, things do taste different abroad, don't they?
But how has he been abroad?
Well, that's a good point as well. It's these are just all the kind of details that don't actually need to be considered when it comes to considering these kind of debates, because there's an abstract kind of fiction that's created, which is the basis on which most of these conversations in these tribunals do take place. Of course, you are right to point out this case will go to an upper tribunal. I think there will be a lot of attention on it when it does so, and hopefully we might end up with a judge that isn't perhaps as beholden to the whole left-wing law scene.
Or perhaps a judge who is also discerning over the nuggets. I mean, maybe that's where the bias came from here.
Well, maybe they need to bring out a whole tray of chicken nuggets and ask the child to blind
that's a good idea. Right, blind test the nuggets. Away you go, right? Which ones do you like? I like number 3. The kid doesn't speak English, apparently, but I like number 3. OK, so number 3, let's have a look. Oh, look, it's Albania's finest nuggets.
Busted.
Sorry, mate, you're done for. Robert, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Robert Bates is a Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control.